so I'll start recording now, actually. So just make, I asked you earlier if you're okay with me recording it. Yeah, just let me know in the chat if you have a problem with that. And obviously you can have your video off if you want. If you don't want to appear in it, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so let's get started with the story, the cattle raid of Cooley. Okay, so going to move on to the second slide now there. Okay, so this is again one of the main characters from the story, Cuchulainn, or the Hound of Ulster. This particular statue is from the GPO, right, the General Post Office in O'Connell Street in Dublin. One thing that you might notice about this particular statue, right, is that you have a raven, right, on Fiach, right? That's the Irish word for raven. Raven is a bird that's in the crow family. And the raven was one of the avatars, or one of the forms that the Morrigan, that very powerful ancient goddess that the Celts had. And she was the goddess of war and suffering, but also she was associated with fertility and with the harvesting of crops as well. So she was a very, very important figure, but she was also responsible for the death of Cuchulainn, which we will find out about a little bit later. She, in the guise of a woman at one point in this story, the Morrigan turns into this beautiful woman and she falls in love with Cuchulainn. And she comes to Cuchulainn and, you know, she asks him to marry her, but Cuchulainn is too busy fighting. He's too busy protecting Ulster, as you will see a little bit later, and rejects her. And then she is not a person who takes kindly to rejection. And she ends up basically being responsible for Cuchulainn's death towards the end of the story. And I will be showing you the place where, according to legend, Cuchulainn's death took place. Okay, so let me just move on to the next slide. So this is the thing that I was talking about earlier. So this is the name of the place in the story, the Cooley Peninsula. You can see that it's on a little peninsula between Ulster and Leinster and Connacht, okay? So, or in the modern day border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, the country that we're in now. Okay, so all right, so that's where the story is located. So here is a painting. I've got all of the references, the citations where I got these paintings and drawings from a little bit later. Here is one of the other main characters in the story. This is Queen Maeve. And Queen Maeve is usually depicted as being a beautiful blonde woman. So she was the queen of the kingdom of Connacht, but also she was semi-divine. Okay, so she's a goddess as well. So she's a very powerful figure. And here she is seated on her throne in a place called Ra Corrigan, which is where the remains of the palace of the king and queens of Connacht is located today. It's now an archaeological site. You can see that I've kind of marked it here in this little map. And also in the list of places on Google Maps, I'm going to show you exactly where it was and where the present day remains are located, that you can go and visit, hopefully when the 5-kilometer restrictions are lifted next month. Okay, so going on to the next slide now. This is when I was growing up in Ireland. I remember this is before the euro that came into effect on the 1st of January 2001, I believe. So I remember the punt, or the Irish pound, that we had. And I remember, you know, when I was going on holidays down to Waterford, that's where my mother was from, you know, people would give you a pound, right? They would hand me a note of a pound. And on the pound, the old Irish pound, was a picture of Queen Maeve. I think this particular picture was painted by the brother of William Butler Yeats. I think his name was John Butler Yeats, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, this is Queen Maeve of this story. And in the background, you can see some of the script from the Book of Leinster on Lower Line, right? This beautiful old Gaelic script that you can see depicted on this note. Unfortunately, this note, of course, doesn't exist anymore, but you might see one from time to time when people are talking about the old Irish pound. And here it says on it, Bank Cheannis na hÉireann, the Central Bank of Ireland. Okay, so as I was saying, right, today Ireland is divided into 4 different provinces, but these don't have any kind of political status or any kind of legislative status anymore in Ireland. They are only historical provinces. Now, they are important because there are rugby teams from each of the 4 provinces. And so, for example, you have the rugby team of Munster and Leinster and Ulster and Connacht. You know, they're always having matches against each other and doing well in the Heineken Cup, which is the European Rugby Union Cup. So you may have heard of the provinces in that way. But they don't have any, you know, like borders or anything today. But still, for Irish people today, they're very important. And in history, Ireland was divided into 5 different kingdoms. So those of you who came a little bit late, you might have missed that I was saying that the Irish word for the province of Munster that we're living in at the moment is Cúige Moon. And Cúige, translated into English, means a 5th, right? So Ireland was divided into 5 provinces, or 5/5. So that's why we say Cúige Moon, or the province of Moon. Moon, if you missed it earlier, was an ancient Celtic goddess who is sometimes called Danu or Anu. Okay, so right, so getting on to the start of the story. So a long time ago, Maeve was the queen of Connacht. One day she had an argument with her husband, Ailill, about which of them was richer. She compared their property with each other. They turned out to have exactly the same amount of riches, except for one possession alone. So one thing, possession, is something that you own. Ailill's great bull. So he had a bull by the name of Fionn Vannoch. So that was the only difference between Maeve's wealth and her husband Ailill's wealth. So he had this bull and Maeve didn't have anything like that. And Maeve, of course, was disgusted. She was extremely jealous. And she decided then and there to acquire a bull equal in magnificence to her husband's. Okay, because, you know, she couldn't have Ailill, her husband, having won over on her. So they had the exact same amount of wealth or the exact same amount of riches, except for that one thing. Okay, so here is a picture of Fionn Vannoch, right? This picture is of a statue that is in the place called Racrogach, right? Or this is where Maeve's palace was. And it's also the bull that's depicted in lots of, this is a graphic novel of On Time, or the cattle raid of Cooley. And you see that the bull is on the front of it. Also, if you go to this historical site, which you can see on the Google map list that I will give you at the end, a lot of people will take a picture next to this sculpture, or they'll buy the t-shirt, you know, with the bull Fionn Vanach on the front of it. So this is the bull that Ailill had that Maeve was very, very jealous of. Now, it turned out, right, that there was only one bull in Ireland that was greater in magnificence than the one that Ailill had in Connacht. And this bull was located, yes, you've probably guessed it, in the Cooley Peninsula. So that's what this word means, translated into English, right? Down Cooley is the brown of Cooley, right? Or the brown bull of Cooley. So here's a statue of him up in the hills of County Louth. And there's another sculpture of him as well. This one, the one that you can see, the silhouette of it, is one that's very, very big that you can see as you're driving by on the way from Dublin to Belfast, for example. You meet it on the road there. And here is one of the statues that's located in the Cooley Peninsula. And it would, you know, was rumored to be like a giant bull. So you can see the size of it in the left-hand corner there in comparison, you know, to those farmers. And yeah, another depiction of it as well in this recent translation from the original Irish script in the Book of Leinster by Kieran Carson. Kieran Carson is an expert in Old Irish, so he was able to translate that and published this book. So this is one of the main books that I'm basing this story that I'm telling you on. Okay, so so Maeve found out this information. She found out about the brown bull of Cooley from her druid, right? So this is her druid. The druid, remember, was the holy person or sorcerer, and all of the kings and queens of the different provinces of Ulster had a druid that they could go to for advice. They also acted as judges as well as counselors, so they had a lot of different roles. Her druid was a guy by the name of Fergus MacRoth. So she asked him what to do. How could she get this bull from Cooley? And he said, look, leave it to me. I will travel to Cooley, to the owner, Dara MacFiacra. He was the farmer who owned the brown bull of Cooley. I will travel to his house. I will travel to Dara's house, and I will get the bull for you. I will just offer him lots of riches and money and things like that. And I will get the bull for you, and I will bring it back to Connacht, and, you know, you will be richer than your husband. Okay, so his name was Fergus MacRoth. Maeve was waiting, first of all, in Connacht with her powerful warriors. And Fergus went off to Cooley. He called into the house of the farmer who owned the brown bull of Cooley, and he offered him all of the riches in Connacht for the brown bull. And Dara, the farmer, said he was very happy to give her the bull on loan for a year. So Fergus was delighted, of course, with this. And Dara said to him, look, Fergus, stay here for the night. I will organize a feast in your honor. And also I will give you the bull, and you can take it back tomorrow, and I will give it to you for 1 year. So Fergus was delighted with this. And, you know, even Dara didn't want any of the riches that Maeve had gave him to offer to the farmer. So he said, no, I'll give it to you for free. So anyway, they had a great feast in Dara's house, and they had a wonderful time, and they were watching the bull out in the fields when they were having the feast, and a lot of dancing and storytelling going on. Finally, right, everybody was going to sleep, and Dara, right, Dara MacFiacra, remember who was the name of the farmer who owned the brown bull, he heard Fergus talking to his men. And Fergus was saying, oh, isn't it great? Isn't it great that he's giving us the bull, you know, without us having to fight him? Because, you know, as you all know, we were all prepared to use violence to get the bull. So Dara heard this, and of course he became very angry. And he immediately ran over to Fergus and he said, Fergus, you're not getting my bull. You're not getting my bull. No matter what you say, no matter how much you give me, you're not getting it. You have to leave my house now. So just after the feast, before they slept, he banished them all from his house and told them to go back to where they come from. So they had to go back all the way back to Connacht with nothing, with no bull. And Maeve was extremely angry when they arrived back, and they were unsuccessful. So what did Maeve do? Well, she did what any sensible queen of Connacht would do in her place. She decided to raise an army and attack Connacht and bring back the brown bull of Cooley by force. So that's what she did. Now, Conor MacNassa was the king of Ulster, and he had a very powerful band of soldiers called An Craobh Rua, right? The Red Branch. And their symbol was, they had, you know, the red hand of Ulster, on Lámh Dearg of Ulster, which is still on the flag of Ulster today, right? You will see the red hand. The reason that it was red was that the warriors of An Craobh Rua, they would get blood on them, on their hands, killing anybody who tried to breach the sovereign borders of the kingdom of Ulster. All right, so if you ever see the map or the flag of Ulster, you will see that red hand on Lámh Dearg Ulig, the red hand of Ulster. And their greatest warrior, the leader of An Craobh Rua, was Cuchulainn, a hound of Cullen, the greatest warrior in Europe. He had proven himself in a battle between all of the greatest warriors of all of Europe up in Scotland's fort on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. She was a woman who was the greatest warrior in the world, besides Cuchulainn, and it's where Cuchulainn went to get his training to become a warrior. So you can visit the remains of her palace, of Scotland's palace, on the Isle of Skye as well today, where Cuchulainn did his training. I'll give you a link as well afterwards to a series of cartoons about Cuchulainn and his adventures and how he got his training from on Scotland. Okay, so anyway, Cuchulainn was a very powerful warrior. And just to give you an idea of how powerful his group of warriors were on Craobh Rua, in order to join this elite group of warriors, you had to be able to dance on the point of his spear. So Cuchulainn would put his spear into the ground, standing perpendicular, standing, you know, straight up. And you would have to climb up to the top of the spear and be able to dance on the point of the spear without the soles of your feet, the bottom of your feet bleeding. So that was one of the feats that you had to manage to do in order to join this elite group of warriors. The warrior goddess on Scotland over in the Isle of Skye in Scotland, she introduced originally this task to Cuchulainn, and then he brought it back and he used it to in order to, have a bar or a challenge that people had to accomplish in order to join the Red Branch of warriors. In the Irish Army, still today, you have a group of elite troops, and they're called the Red Branch. You can see their insignia just here. Okay, and yeah, sometimes the Red Branch Knights are depicted like this, right? This is from a Japanese video game. The name of the video game escapes me now, but there are lots of video games that maybe you might have heard of that base their stories or the narrative behind the video game on Chréibh Rua and Cuchulainn and his warriors. You may have heard of Cuchulainn before. Cuchulainn was the son of a human woman, right, who was the sister of Conor mac Nessa, the king of Ulster. And he was the son of the god Lu, L-U-G-H. The god Lu, you can think of as being something like Apollo in the Greco-Roman tradition. Lu had his palace in what is now known as Newgrange, right, or Brú na Boinne, the palace of River Boyne. And anyway, Cuchulainn grew up there in the Boyne, not knowing who his mother or father were. But when he was old enough, he decided to travel to find out where his mother's family came from. So he traveled up to Rowan Macha, which was where the palace of Conor mac Nessa was, up in Connacht, and he did his training up there. And that's where he got his name. So originally his name was Setanta. And I won't go into the story now, but there's another interesting story about how Cuchulainn gets his name during his training up in Conor mac Nessa's palace. So let's move on to the next slide here. So as I was saying, right, where we are with the story at the moment is Maeve has raised an army, and she is going to attack. Let me just, actually, my slides are going backwards. So I'm going to have to go back here for a second. All right, so bear with me. I've got a new computer here. Okay, so yeah, so where we were was Maeve had raised an army, and she's going to attack the province of Connacht. Now, this is where it all starts. And this is the greatest battle in the history of Ireland, the ancient history of Ireland, the battle between Maeve and Conor mac Nessa. Now, as I was saying earlier, remember the raven, right? The raven bird who was responsible, I said, for killing Cuchulainn in the end. Well, she was a powerful sorceress, the Morrigan, and she put a spell on the warriors of Ulster, and it made them extremely weak. Now, she was, the reason that she cast that spell on the warriors of Ulster was that she was in the employ of Queen Maeve, as Queen Maeve's counselor, right, or somebody giving her advice. And she was a powerful prophetess, the Morrigan, or this is the goddess that's often depicted as a raven. So when Cuchulainn rejected her, she got very angry and she went off and she found employ with Queen Maeve. And it was under Queen Maeve's instruction that she put a powerful spell on the warriors of Ulster, and it made them fall into very deep sleep and they could not fight. Okay, so Ulster was undefended. Now, one person escaped this powerful spell, this powerful act of magic that the Morrigan goddess had cast. and that was Cuchulainn. And the reason that he hadn't suffered under the spell was that, first of all, he was only 17 years old. So he wasn't yet a warrior officially. He was still not, he hadn't come of age yet. And the other reason was that he was half a god, right? Remember, his father was Lu, who was an ancient Celtic god who lived in Newgrange. So he had, let's say he had the god's blood running in his veins. So he was protected from this spell. And he was the only person that was left to defend Ulster. Okay. So so all of the other warriors of on Crea Brua of the Red Branch, they were all asleep, right? You can see them here, the Zeds. So they were under this magical spell, and Cuchulainn was the only person who escaped this spell. And he was the only person that could protect Ulster at the time. So Cuchulainn went out on his own, and he went to a place called Ardee, right? This is a place that's in the town of Ardee in County Louth, and it marked the historical boundary between the Kingdom of Connacht and the Kingdom of Ulster. So he went to that river, and he waited at that river with his dog that you can see next to him there. This is a statue that is there at the place where the ancient border was between Munster, or between Connacht and Ulster. And he waited there for Maeve's armies to arrive. So you can see that the palace of Conor MacNassa is in the background, and this is a depiction of Cuchulainn, although not a very historically accurate depiction of Cuchulainn from that Japanese video game that I was telling you about. So he was waiting on his own by the river. So anyway, Maeve turned up with her warriors, and basically Cuchulainn, along with his assistant, right, who was the person who was the greatest charioteer in the kingdom, all of the Kingdom of Ulster, but also the 5 Kingdom of Ireland and also the Kingdom of Scotland. So he and his charioteer had escaped the spell, and they were defending Ulster single-handedly. Okay, so he took on Maeve's army on his own. Eventually, Maeve had an idea. Now, there was a warrior that she had who was also the son of a god, right? His name was Fergia. Now, Fergia and Cuchulainn knew one another because both of them had been in the same foster family. So both of them had grown up in Brunaboyne or Newgrange, that palace there on the banks of the River Boyne. And they had both, been babies, and they'd been dropped off there, and nobody knew who their parents were. And they grew up not knowing who their mothers were, who their fathers were. They were foster brothers, right? You can see foster brothers here. So they had a very, very close relationship. And he had a powerful weapon as well at his disposal. And this weapon was a magical skin of horn, which nothing could pierce. Now, as I was saying before, Cuchulainn had been given a very powerful weapon himself, which was an Gá Bollig, right? The spear of death. And this spear had been given to him by his father, Lu. Now, Lu had used this spear to kill the infamous god called Balor. Balor was a god that looked like, what's the name of that figure in the Odyssey that only has one eye? The Cyclops. So he looked like the Cyclops, right? Maybe even the story of the Cyclops and the story of Balor come from the same Indo-European source. This is what some academics have written in some of the books that I've read about in preparation for this talk. But anyway, he slew Baelor, or Cyclops, with this magical spear. Now, Baelor's eye, right, his single eye, this eye was extremely powerful, and anything that it looked at would immediately be vaporized. But Lu, the god, had thrown this spear in sometime in the ancient mists of prehistory, and had managed to put the spear right through this evil eye that Baelor had, and he killed him instantly. So Cuchulainn had this weapon, but Fergia had his own weapon that could protect him against this. Okay, so of course Fergia didn't want to fight Cuchulainn, right? You know, he and Cuchulainn were friends, but honor was very important for Celtic warriors. And when you ask for the privilege of having single combat against the greatest warrior of your opponent's army, then you had to face them in battle, right? This also happened in other societies. For example, you might have seen it in the story of the Iliad, right? That I think it's what's his name? Achilles, that warrior who, if you've ever seen the film Troy, is played by Brad Pitt. He faces the greatest warrior of the kingdom of Troy in single battle, and he slays him as well. So if anybody ever asks you to fight them in single battle, then you have to fight. So Cuchulainn didn't have any choice. It was the warrior's honor that he had to fight whoever Maeve had chosen to fight him. Now, Fergia, even though he wanted to retain his honor, he also didn't want to fight Cuchulainn at all. And he was, in spite of losing all of his honor, he refused to fight because Cuchulainn was his great friend. But Maeve had a beautiful daughter that Fergia was in love with. So she said to him, look, if you fight Cuchulainn and if you beat him, I will give you my daughter's hand in marriage, and you will be the king of Connacht. Okay, and your son will be, or your daughter will be, the next king or queen of Connacht. So anyway, Fergia gave in. He was completely in love with Maeve's daughter, so he decided that he would fight Cuchulainn. Now I'm going to show you a little bit later where this fight took place. This fight is quite well known, right? I'm gonna show you some a depiction basically of the end of the battle. So basically this battle went on in Ardee, on the river in Ardee, or the River Dee as it's called. The river itself is named after Fergia, right? So it's the River Yea. And you can see that eventually Cuchulainn won. But the battle itself, right, it lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. And they would get up when the sun rose in the morning, and they would fight all day. And then they would stop fighting when the sun went down in the evening. And then they would go and they would tend to each other's wounds. They would put healing herbs on each other's wounds and put bandages on them. And then they would eat together, and then they would talk about what their life was like when they were growing up together, when they were both just young boys living on the banks of the Boyne. Eventually, though, with the Morrigan's help, remember the Morrigan was the goddess, with the Morrigan's help, the Morrigan stole Fergia's magical skin of horn. And at that moment where she stole it, Cuchulainn had an gá bolaga, and he threw it at Fergia and killed him instantly. Now, of course, he was extremely sad when he killed the warrior, because Fergia had been his great friend, and he was overcome with sadness. And he picked up Fergia in his arms and he carried him out of the river. Here's a picture of the same event from a book called The Boy's Guide to Cuchulainn, published in 1906. I'll give you a link to that book at the end of this talk. Here is a modern day sculpture just next to the river where this battle took place. Now there's a ford where the river is and where the battle took place, where the armies of Maeve were trying to enter the kingdom of Ulster. And that is the place where this statue is. And the name of that place in modern Irish, the name of that town is called Bala á Ergia. So the town of the ford of Fergia. So a ford is a place where the river is low enough, ford, F-O-R-D in English, where the river is low enough for you to be able to walk across it or to go across it on horseback. So after Fergia had been killed, had been slain, Cuchulainn buried him, and then he continued fighting. But he wasn't able to fight as fiercely anymore because he had been, mortally wounded by Fergia. And the Morrigan, you can see her here depicted as a raven, right? The Morrigan had, eventually she had her wishes. And remember, she had been a beautiful young maiden, and she appeared and fell in love with Cuchulainn, but Cuchulainn had rejected her. And in revenge for rejecting her, she wanted to kill him. And eventually a wound that Fergia had inflicted upon him got worse and worse. It festered, and eventually Cuchulainn became weak and died. Now, Cuchulainn went to this stone, right? Now, this stone, it's called Cloch Chulainn. It's in modern day County Armagh. And it's still there. You can go and take a picture of it. Cuchulainn, he tied himself to this stone, right, as he was dying from this wound that he had, that had been inflicted upon him by Fergia. So he tied himself to the stone so that the warriors of Connacht, when they were coming over the plains of Armagh, would see him, and they would see that Cuchulainn was still standing and that he was still alive and that he was still protecting the kingdom of Ulster. Right? So he's sometimes known as the protector of Ulster. Now, in my list of places on Google Maps, you can see the place where this stone is if you want to go and visit it, take a picture next to it. There's it's a nice thing to do as well, to find out where this event took place. Now you can see, right, that he tied himself to the stone with some ropes here, but in actuality, the story goes that Cuchulainn tied himself to the stone using his entrails, right? So he took out his small intestine, right? It's very, very long, right? The small intestine. He took this out, and as he was dying, right, as he was in his, what we say, death throes, Throes, he tied himself to the stone. So it wasn't with a rope, it was actually with his intestines, with his guts, that he tied himself to that stone. And you can still see Cuchulainn's blood on that stone, it is said. So, and here's another depiction of the famous death of Cuchulainn that you can see, and you have the Morrigan depicted as a raven on top of it. And this is in the GPO in O'Connell Street in Dublin that you can go and see. So how old, guys, do you think this story is? Well, as I was saying at the before I started this talk, I was saying that it was written sometime during the 6th, 7th to 8th centuries. We're not exactly sure when it happened, but it must have been written down at this time. Okay, sorry, guys, there. I'm going to have to log out. Guys, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. The presentation isn't sharing anymore, is it? Yeah, so sorry about that. Sorry about that. My computer had logged me out of Zoom for some reason, but it's let me back in now. So if you missed that part there, I was just telling you about, let me just make sure that I'm recording again. Yeah, okay, so it is recording, great. Yeah, so I was just telling you when the story was written. So let me just go back here. Sorry, guys, right, okay, so it should have been this slide that I was on. Yeah, so I was saying before we started the talk, just before, that this story was written down, we think, sometime between the 6th to 9th centuries, sometime around that period. And the Celts themselves, according to the historic or the consensus of historians, they arrived in Ireland about 600 BC. Now, the story was probably written sometime around 200, 400 of the Common Era. Okay. And what aspects of the story come from Celtic people? So look, the story itself is mostly fictional, it's mythology, but it does reveal certain aspects of Celtic life to us. And one of the aspects that it tells us about is, first of all, that the Celts were a warrior people. It tells us about the kingdoms that we had in Ireland at the time. It tells us something about, the royal families. It tells us about children being fostered out to other families. Remember, Cuchulainn and his friend Fergia, they grew up in another home, right on the banks of the Boyne, not where they were from, not where their families were from. So there's lots of interesting things about Antoine or Cattle of Cooley, which explains certain aspects of the nature of the ancient Celts, the ancient Gaels to us. This is the place where the fight took place, right? This is the river where the fight took place between Cuchulainn and Fergia. So you can see that the water here is low enough to be able to walk across. And it's just up here near to the town of Dundalk, right? This is where the town is. And you can go and you can visit this beautiful sculpture of Cuchulainn taking Fergia out of the river to bury him. There are also lots of place names. I was saying that the name of that place where that statue is located is called Bala Oha Ergia, or RG in short, and that's the name of it in English. And there's lots of other place names around Ireland with that name in Irish, with Oha. So Oha means ford as in F-O-R-D, place in the river where you can, where the river is low enough that you would be able to cross it. Now, you might know of some places in Cork with Oha in it. maybe that's something that you can do after this class to have a look. So usually it'll be in English as ATH or EATH. Now, one example of a place is Athenry in Galway, right? So that is Áha an Rí. Now, Rí is like Rex in Latin. Latin and Gaelic are closely related languages. So Áha Rí, Athenry, and you might know the song, The Fields of Athenry. So the town itself is up in East Galway. So if you see that place name in Irish places, you will know that there was an ancient ford there. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of place names like that around Ireland. Also, the Irish name for Dublin, Baile Átha Cliath, the town of the ford of the hurdles. And there's also another town called Athlone, right? Áha Luan, or the ford of Lu, the god, who was the father of Cuchulainn. And there's loads of other ones. If you want to see some videos of the stories, you can click on these links here. So we'll take you to this page, and then just click on the English version because the link is to the Irish version. And then you can look at these or take a look at these stories all about Cuchulainn. Now, I have two other stories that I want to talk about very briefly. If you have time, right? We have about 20 or so minutes left, but I might take a break for maybe 1 or 2 minutes if you want to go to the toilet. And while we're having the break, you can have a listen to some of the music that I prepared today. So I'm going to put on the song that I told you about earlier. It's called the An Chuoine Cuchulainn, or Lament for Cuchulainn. So I'll put that on and you can have a listen to it. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of music that is usually played on the bagpipes, right? The PP Ullam. So I'll put that on here in the background. You can have a listen to it, and we'll take maybe a 2-minute break for you to get a glass of water or go to the toilet. And we will come back, and we've got 2 other stories that we're going to look at. The first one is the Children of Lear, and the second one is Deirdre of the Sorrows.
You can build countless.
All right, so it's actually asking me to just listen to an ad, and then I'll put on that piece of music. Okay. Right, so let's take a break for 1 or 2 minutes. The next story, Okay, just first of all, before I go on to that story, I just want to talk about the materials briefly. Okay, so right, you have in here, you have for example, the PowerPoint, right, that I just sent you. You also have the word cards from today, right? Some of the words that came up, and then the picture that I was going through earlier, and then you have a word search as well. Okay, the next story that we're going to be looking at is the Children of Lear. So I will just put that into the chat now for you. And again, it has lots of materials. 1 second there. So I just have to copy the link here and send it to you. Okay, and I'll share materials for a last story as well. Okay, so hopefully you can see those materials now. Okay, so let's have a look at the second story then. So I told you it's all about the Children of Lear. Okay, this story is a little bit shorter, but it's based in Munster. And okay, so Lear was a king. Now Lear was also the son of a sea god, right? So his name was, or his father's name was Manannán, and Manannán was the sea god in the Celtic tradition, similar to, for example, Neptune or Poseidon, and the Isle of Man is named after him. So his son was a king as well. So that's Lear. Now, this story is all about his children, the children of Lear. Now, if I can just put this slide on full screen. Okay, so let's hear about the Children of Lear then. So many years ago, there lived a king in Kerry called Lear. He lived in a beautiful castle with his wife and 4 children. So you have Fionnuala, Fiachra, A, and Con. Lear's wife became very sick and died. Everyone was extremely sad. Lear did not want his children to grow up without a mother, so he got married again, and his new wife was called Aoife. She was very mean to his children. She was jealous of how much Lear loved them. She came up with a plan to get rid of them. One day, Aoife took the children to a lake, which was beside the castle. The children were excited as they loved to go to the lake. As the children swam in the lake, Aoife's plan began to take shape. Suddenly, she pulled out her magic wand and pointed it at the 4 children. Now, sitting on the lake were 4 beautiful swans. So she turned them into swans. The children were shocked. Aoife, what have you done to us? Fiachra said. I've put a magic spell on you, said Aoife, laughing. You must live on this lake for the next 900 years. Only when you hear the sound of a church bell will the spell be broken. With that, Aoife left the lakeside, happy that her plan had worked. When Aoife returned to the castle, she pretended to cry. She told Lear that his children had drowned. Lear was very upset and ran to the lake as fast as he could. When he arrived, he saw 4 swans. They swam up to him immediately. He couldn't believe it when one of the swans called his name. Father, exclaimed Fionnuala. The children told Lear of Aoife's evil spell. Lear returned to the castle. He was furious. He banished his wicked wife from his kingdom forever. King Lear visited his children every day. He read them stories and sang them songs. And some years passed and Lear died. The children were very sad. They had nobody to visit with them anymore, and they became very lonely. 900 years went by, and the children grew very tired and very old. As they swam on the lake one day, A heard a noise. It was a church bell. Finally, the spell will be broken soon, said Conor. Now, the time when the spell was broken was also the time of the arrival of Christianity to Ireland. Soon after, a monk walked by the lake and saw the swans. He was astonished to hear them speak. The children told him their sad story, and he blessed them. As the monk touched their foreheads, the spell was broken. On the grass stood 4 beautiful children once again. Aoife's magic had been broken and the children were set free. Okay, so it's a much shorter story. Now, this story is one of the reasons why all of the swans in Ireland survived the famine. So in the famine from 1845 to 1852, people were starving. 4 million people, had nothing to eat. And they ate every kind of thing, every kind of bird, every kind of animal you can imagine: mice, rats, cats, dogs. There wasn't a dog left in Cork City, it was said, by the time the famine ended in 1852. But the one animal that they refused to eat was swans. So the swans that you can see in the loch in Cork, these swans date from before the famine. All of the other birds, ducks and geese that you have there, they all date from after the famine, all of the fish as well, because all of the food had been eaten by the people during the time of the famine. So that's why, that's the reason why, because the Irish people thought, up until very recently, they thought that the swans were their ancestors, right? So when you died, you became a swan, just like these children have become swans in the story. Okay, now the last story that I want to tell you, now this is a very quick one as well, is the story of Deirdre and Nisha. Okay, so let us get started with this one. Okay, so from the beginning. All right, so here, this is the story of Deirdre and Nisha. Okay, now let's get started. So Deirdre is very famous in Irish history. I'm not going to go through the details here because I'll give away some of the things in the story. But she was always depicted as a very beautiful blonde-haired woman. Okay, so let's start with the details of the story now. So once upon a time, Conor MacNassa, right, who you heard about in the previous story, he was the king of Ulster, was the king of Ulster. One night he went out to a feast at the castle of his royal storyteller, Phelim. It just so happened that that night, Phelim's wife was in labor, right? So she was in labor, she was going to be giving birth. And she gave birth to a beautiful little girl. They called that little baby girl Deirdre. So this was how Deirdre was born. Everyone was celebrating, having the feast, until a druid, a powerful sorcerer called Cathbad, spoke. So he said, she will be a beautiful lady, but Ulster and its people will suffer greatly because of that. So here's a picture of Cathbad, the druid who made this prophecy. The words of the druid scared the company of guests. Many felt that the only solution was to kill the child. You will not murder her, the king said. I will take responsibility for her when she comes of age. So he decided to marry her. So Conor built a house hidden in a dark, unknown corner of the forest. He placed the baby Deirdre there along with an old lady, an old nurse that would look after her. Her name was Laurcam, and she would bring up the young child. Conor would not let anyone see her until the day they got married. Deirdre grew up to be a beautiful young woman, the most beautiful woman in Ireland. Conor fell in love with her. One winter's day, Deirdre went out for a walk and she soon saw some blood on the snow. A raven came down to drink it. Now, who do you think the raven is? The raven, of course, is the evil goddess, the Morrigan, right? Or Baive or Fiocht of the other names that she has in Irish, right? So she was the goddess depicted as a black raven. So the raven came down to drink the blood. That afternoon, Deirdre told Laurcam what she had seen. So Deirdre asked, is there any man in Ireland with skin as white as the snow, cheeks as red as the blood, and hair as black as that raven's? Yes, there is, she said. His name is Nisha Ishnig, and he lives near here. So I told you, remember what ravens symbolize in Irish mythology, right? The goddess of war and death, Morrigan. Deirdre asked her foster mother to bring this Nisha to her house in secret so that she may lay her eyes upon her. Laurcam did as she was told. When Nisha and Deirdre saw one another, they fell in love on the spot. They got married in secret and they escaped off to Scotland. Nisha's brothers, Onla and Argon, went with them in order to protect the couple, Deirdre and Nisha, because they knew that that Conor would be extremely angry when he found out what had happened. The Ishnig family were welcomed in Scotland. Right, this is the name of the surname or the family name of Nisha and his brothers, Onla and Ardon. After a while, however, the King of Scotland, right, this should say the King of Scotland, not as king, just the King of Scotland, fell in love with Deirdre and wanted to marry her. The Ishnig family had to go on the run once again. So the story came back to Ulster that the Ishnigs were on the run once again. Friends of Nisha asked Conor MacNassa, the King of Ulster, to let them back into Ireland. Conor at last relented, right? At first he refused and refused and refused, but then finally he relented and he allowed them to return to Ireland. Conor was a treacherous man, however, and he was only thinking of revenge against the Ishnigs. He asked his elite guards, the Red Branch, right on Crea Rua, that you heard about earlier, to go out and to kill Naoise and bring back Deirdre to him. Naoise's friends were very angry with Conor. They attacked Conor's stronghold, right, that we heard about earlier. Owen Macha was a stronghold, and burnt it to the ground. They also murdered 300 of Conor's greatest warriors. Then they left Ulster and headed for the kingdom of Connacht, the great enemy of the kingdom of Ulster. The Queen of Connacht, Maeve, and her husband Alil, who we know about now, asked them to join her army. So this story happened before this great battle that I spoke about on Tyne. They agreed and spent many years afterwards attacking Ulster in order to get revenge against Conor MacNassa for what he had done to the children of Ishnach. Poor Deirdre was very, very sad. She was inconsolable. She did not smile from that day on, from the day of Naoise's death until the day of her own passing a year later. She was put into, this should be put into, right? She was put into the same grave as Naoise and his two brothers. The Druid who had made the prophecy, Copbod, many years earlier had been right when he said that Deirdre would bring destruction and suffering to the kingdom of Ulster. So how old is this story, in your opinion? Well, it actually was written around the same time as on Tyne. Here's a picture of the story of Deirdre and Naoise on a stamp in Ireland. So it was written a little bit later than on Tyne, the 8th and 9th centuries. And right here is a depiction of Naoise as well, that famous son of Clan Ishnig. And Clan Ishnig, they were from a hill in County Westmeath, right? The hill of Ishnach. And that hill is still where they celebrate the festival of Bealtaine or May Day with bonfires today. So even though the story is fictional, again, it contains useful information about the ancient people of Ireland. The people who knew it, knew a lot about pre-Christian Celts. So it probably was composed and passed down orally much, much earlier than it was written down. So maybe the 2nd, 3rd century AD, something like that. Okay, so here are some things that you can find out about the story, through the story about the world of the Celts. So there's a great deal of violence and war in the story. The Celts were a warrior society. There is a Druid in the story, and Druids were the priestly class of Celtic society. There are also Druids in the other stories that I told you. So the wife of King Lear was also a Druidess. They were the judges, teachers, and counselors, right? And Merlin, who was another Druid, King Arthur was another Celtic mythological tale. Phelim was a storyteller. He had a big feast, and this is another aspect of Celtic culture, that there were big feasts and stories were told, and usually the stories were accompanied with music on the harp. So true or false questions, guys. You can do these on your own, and they're fairly straightforward anyway. And that is the end of the talk. There are lots of links on these slides with more information, where I got the pictures from. Sorry, I went a couple of minutes over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I have some time to take some questions.
Sorry, Rob.
Yeah.
Would you mind finishing, because I need the account for CELTA? I'm not sure.
Okay,
if you've got
okay.
this.
Yeah. So guys, thanks very much. All right, I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.